I saw myself standing in front of you 40 years ago before any of this ever happened. I imagined it, I thought it, I believed it. Even though things in my life at that time, I was at the darkest place that any human being could never imagine. At 17 years old, I was incarcerated, convicted, and sentenced to 105 years in prison for a murder that I did not commit, nor did I know anything about the person. July 27th, 1985, will forever be engraved in my mind. I remember sitting on my mother's porch, as I often did on weekends, as she prepared breakfast. And I remember this particular morning that I smelled the bacon, and my mother knew that I loved scrambled eggs sprinkled with cheese. And she was in the kitchen preparing that and hot grits. And I remember in the background, Aretha Franklin singing Respect. It just permeated our house. And I remember thinking that morning, everything is smooth. As I sat on my mother's porch and I saw a police car, it wasn't nothing unusual for me. I thought nothing of it. I was just sitting there enjoying my eggs and my bacon, waiting and anticipating for my 2-month-old daughter to come. I was so excited about this morning because the very person that I love more than anything was about to enter into my arms. She always made me feel appreciated and loved. And I remember thinking, wow, this is going to be an incredible day. And as I sat on the porch, I remember seeing the police car. He passed, then he stopped, and then he lowered his window and he said, "Ma'am, who is that boy, that black boy that's sitting next to you?" And my mother responded to him, "That's my son, Alphonso." "Why? What did he do?" In return, he said, "No, he's not in trouble or anything. We just want to talk to him for a few minutes." So my mother, believing that he was being truthful, she allowed me to go into his custody. And as a result of that, I remember as I was placed into the police car, I looked back and I saw my mother fall to the ground as though somebody had depleted her. And when I look back, I remember thinking to myself that I'm being lowered into a grave. But why? The further the car got away, the more I was removed from my protection. My mother. I was transported to Milwaukee police station. And at that time, I didn't know how to read or write, and that was a secret that I kept from my family. I was so ashamed to be able to share that, where I held on to it and feared that someone would point their finger and laugh at me. So I remember entering to this small box, this small room, where there was a guy waiting on me, and an investigator, a detective. And I remember looking up at the wall, and I saw a long word on the wall that I could not read nor understand at that time. And that word was homicide division. So I was placed in a box where there was no windows. There was only a chair, and there was only a table. And I remember thinking, how did it get to this point like this? And still there was no answer. I sat there in that interrogation room 12 hours, demanding, pleading, crying, begging to be released. But instead, my words, my cry, my plea fell on deaf ears. Most of my life I spent as a young person. No one ever saw me or never heard me. And so now finally, I'm pleading. And still, the same reaction was no reaction. After 12 hours of being interrogated, the detective came back to the room. He said, "Your mother is in the lobby waiting on you. The only thing you have to do is just put your signature on this paper, and you will be released back into her custody." I was so excited. I'm about to go home, be with my daughter. I'm about to go home, be with my family. I signed that document. An hour later, it came back as a confession. I cried out to him. I told him, "Those are not my words." But nobody again listened. So I was transferred to the Milwaukee Children's Center. And I began to, as I was being transferred, I said, but why am I being transferred here for something that I didn't do? But again, there was silence. So I sat in this police car, completely broken, completely hurt. They eventually took me to the Children's Center. Monday morning, an attorney came, a public defender, a stranger, and I explained to him what happened. And his response was, Alphonso, these things don't happen in 1985. I say, but it did happen to me. It did happen to me. So from that point on, if I didn't have an attorney who's supposed to defend me, to believe in me, then what other choice would I have? So I decided at that moment that I would be the baddest, the meanest, the toughest, and I would begin to become the person who they said that I am. So within 6 months, I was waived into adult court, found guilty of first-degree murder, and sent to Green Bay Correctional Institution, which is in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and given 100 years plus 5 years. 18 years old I just turned. I just had a 2-month-old daughter. No one ever gave me answers as to why. So I entered to Green Bay even more insecure on who I was, more confused about how I was placed in this situation, mad at my mother because she wasn't able to protect me. Shook my fist at God because I was like, God, if you're a God of love, how could you allow my life to be taken? Still, I received no answers. So I went throughout the prison, waking up every morning to wreak as much havoc on anybody that was within my sight. If you looked like me, spoke like me, or even nodded your head like me, you became an enemy. So I ended up spending 5 years in solitary confinement. I was forced to spend 23 hours in a cell a day. Again, there was no answers. In this 5 years of solitary confinement, I was so restricted. I was not permitted to be a human, but I was broken down to be something that I wasn't created to be. So I decided that every time this person walked past my cell and he say hello to me, I'm going to throw some urine on him. And I remember this particular day for 5 months straight. The prison chaplain would walk past my cell. How are you doing? I couldn't answer. The best way I can answer is through anger. So I got this urine, I threw it on him. He did not respond. The only thing he said was, Alphonso, I love you and so do God. So he began to do this over and over and over. And my main purpose was to hate everything that he offered to me, especially your God. How could your God allow this to happen to me? The final time he came to my cell, I went through our weekly rituals. I threw urine on him. Alphonso, I love you and so do God. But this time he brought an extra chair. He brought an extra towel. And so after I dashed him, he wiped himself, grabbed the chair, sat in front of my cell and said, Alphonso, I love you and so do God. At that moment, I knew that this man, this pastor, this man of God had a word that was meant for me. Even though I was in the darkest, the most troubling, the belly of the whale, a prison within a prison, no one to cry out to, but at the darkest moment of my life, God sent this man to me to give me a word, but not only a word to love the hate away from me. So as I began to sit there and open up to him, I knew then that this is the one that was going to be the one that pulled me out of the pit of what I was in. I stopped talking about being innocent, but I started believing that there was something greater in my life. There was a reason that I had to suffer the way that I did. So eventually, I shared with the chaplain why I was in prison and I couldn't read or write. So he began to, not only that, but he began to bring coloring books. He began to bring words where I was able to connect the words with the pictures, and as a result, I grew confident in my ability to read and understand. But more importantly, he brought me the King James Bible. And as he brought me the King James Bible, I was so intimidated by it because I couldn't understand the words. But I remember there was one time, and Chaplain didn't notice that the night before, I had purposely ripped the sheet. I wet the sheet so the knot wouldn't loose. And right above the toilet in the solitary confinement, there's a vent. And I remember standing on the toilet, and I remember wrapping the sheet around my neck and connecting it to the vent. And I remember releasing my feet from the toilet. And I fell to the toilet. And I remember thinking, I can't even kill myself, God. I can't even kill myself. That following morning, the chaplain came, and he began to minister something more profound or more powerful than that. He began to tell me, Alphonso, you're a mighty man of God. You're a great man of God, and God has a purpose for you. I believe you. From that one person who spent that time, year after year after year, to put his word and put his love, which was unconditional, I could at least see what was available on the other side. So I took up the mantle. I was like, okay, God, there's a reason why I have 105 years. There's a reason why I struggle with reading and writing. There's a reason why I struggle with communication. There's a reason why I was born for this moment. So at the 5th year, I was released from solitary confinement, and my mission was, the men out there need help. There's trauma. There's trauma that needs to be addressed, and they need somebody to be able to listen to them. So I became that catalyst where they was able to listen to. I became that example for them. And so what I did was I began to create different programs in the penal system. I stopped focusing on me being in prison falsely, because there was still work for me to do on myself. I remember the child within needed to be loved, needed to be appreciated. So I took that opportunity to reach within myself to begin to minister to that child, to begin to love on that child, to begin to tell that child that you are greater than what the system said that you are more than a conqueror, that God had given you a vision way before you ever stepped into this world. Now that you receive, now that you're aware, what are you going to do with it? So I stand on this platform tonight, not only encouraged and inspired, but I also have that hope that I had 40 years ago. That same seed of faith that was planted inside me while I was in the darkest place of my life is now manifested in something great. People told me, Alphonso, you will never get out of prison. For 32 years, I would wake up in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, fold my linen, sit on the edge of my bed in a position of preparation, because I didn't deserve to be there, and I knew that my God was going to open this door and perform a miracle that all would see. I remember one day, the guard walked past, and he was like, Mr. James, you have 105 years. What are you doing? Not according to my God, I'm going home. And so they began to look at me differently, because they was like, how in this world that this guy is walking around a penitentiary with 105 years and smiling and willing to help other people? The suffering that I had to go through was for me. It was for growing me up. It was for developing character, developing purpose, and allowing me to have a platform that his word can be manifested and that his word can be appreciated, because many of us don't pretty much believe in miracles because we never saw a miracle in our life. But you waking up in the morning is a miracle. What you do from that point is up to you.